Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next talk in the discussion stage. We have got this chat now, More Than Machines, exploring the relationship between artists and equipment. And on this most illustrious panel, we have Imogen Heap, Campos, Hazel Mills, and Bjorn. Thank you so much. So, we'll get started with the first question, and I'd like to ask each panel member, what was your first electronic instrument that kind of inspired you and set you off on your journey? I think we'll start with Imogen, actually, please.
Hello. Hi. Very excited to be here. It's amazing. Oh, my God. Yeah, when I was 17, I bought an Ensoniq TS12, and that was my first kind of real wow. I can like get in there and move some stuff around and change the sound rather than just have, you know, presets.
What is that then? The Sonic?
It's an Ensoniq. It's like it's just a keyboard,
right.
Yeah, like large, big keyboard. And I bought it to do my first gigs with. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, and I still don't actually. But that ended up being the kind of backbone of my first record. And I would do all of my, you know, settings in there, and would bring them up for the record, and then do the shows with them. So yeah, that was my first one.
So was that kind of the fact that you could actually affect the tonality then? That was quite an important aspect of it then,
Yeah,
as opposed to something like a piano where it's fixed.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was 12, I started to. I guess that was. I mean, I did have keyboards before then. You know, like a Yamaha P50 or something, P350, I can't remember, when I was like in my teens. And I had an Atari computer at school that nobody knew how to use, but nor did I, but I read this enormous manual and tried to kind of get something out of it when I was, this Atari with Sibelius on it. But I couldn't get into the sounds really and change them on this little module. It wasn't very great. So I guess the shaping of sounds first started, with the Ensoniq. But again, I was kind of, you know, deeply distracted by all the other bits of production, and never really got into wave kind of shaping, and I never really understood it, and I still don't, which is why I'm here, because I want to learn. But that was my first real relationship, and I got kind of emotional about this keyboard. I guess that was my first one.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, well, actually, we'll speed through the panel then with the same question. So, Kai, would you like to sort of follow?
Okay, so there's like the very first, it's similar, like there was definitely keyboards that you come across as a much younger child that are kind of do interesting things, like, you know, the classic SK1 or something like that just you have like a second to put. And I always found that kind of amusing and would spend a lot of time anytime I kind of came across one of those. But then the more kind of memorable moment of like the most kind of impactful was I was doing a music technology course at school, and it was really, really rubbish. And I thought it was going to be about music technology, but it was more this guy was kind of just professing his love for Paul Simon over and over again, and would actually constantly remind us that we'd never achieve what Paul Simon has achieved in music, and then there was another course going on in the next room, which was like the B-Tech or something like that, and we were on the like AS level, and the B-Tech guys were playing with an MS-20, which was, I just distinctly remember the sound of that being like, oh fuck, that's what I was trying to do, you know, like that's what I thought I was going to be doing instead of transcribing. I was making kind of MIDI transcriptions for holiday videos for Cornwall. And so I kind of looked lustfully through the little gap in the door, then playing the MS-20, and then eventually find time to get like hands-on with one, and obviously before the reissue and stuff, so it was, they weren't just in the shops and stuff like that. And I was still in love with that. You know, I've actually kind of, you know, gone through so much gear over the years, but that has always been one that will I would just kind of always have around. And there's just the raw power of it and the sound of it and the filters and the grits, and, you know, it's everything that a monophonic analog synth should be, I think. Really, yeah.
So when you first came upon that, then were you overwhelmed by the possibilities and what all of these, esoteric controls were all about?
It's like many years before that quite strange patch bay made any kind of sense, because it's not the most intuitive patch bay, in terms of if you compare it to lots of equipment now that's more assembly modular, that kind of makes a bit more sense, I think. It's not always clear what's an input and what's an output, and there's just always something else to learn with that synth, I think,
Yeah, lovely, thank you.
Good stuff.
Hazel.
Is this on? Yes. Hello. Interestingly, only if you know me it's interesting, mine was not either a keyboard instrument or a synth. It was an electrics repeater loop station, which I know you've used, right? I got very into live looping, and I think it might have stemmed from a new, at the time, love of American minimalism, like Steve Reich and all that. So I found a looper that had a lot going for it, because you could do so much with it, right? It was this 4-track, had faders, so you could bring the tracks in and out. You could do this kind of, something I loved to do a lot was this sort of like gated, just turning the record on and off so that you get kind of fragments of things, which I did a lot with my voice, but also with piano as well. And I kind of seem to remember doing this kind of makeshift, getting these brackets so that I could attach it to the piano, so it was almost a part of the same instrument, so it was kind of like keys, faders, just all part of the same kind of movement. And that kind of formed a lot of what I ended up doing at the time, was a lot of live sampling and found sound and things like that, which I then ended up doing a lot in Ableton as well.
So is it part of the appeal then, the fact that you could do it all sort of, like make something, that layering thing, working on your own, I guess, with that, being able to make a full sound? That was part of the inspiration of why you got drawn to that.
I guess so, yeah. I think maybe part of it was that I love vocal harmonies, and obviously being one person with one voice, I can't do that unless I've got other people with me, and that was one way that you could, within certain constraints, obviously. That so I would work up quite a lot of song arrangements by having all these different vocal kind of harmony parts, bringing them in and out. So I think that was probably one motivation.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, we'll move over to Kim. Thank you.
Hello. So, being an author is maybe not so interesting what instrument I first used electronically, but it's actually the radio with a tape recorder. I had one very old radio. I started recording all sorts of stuff and thought, well, you can actually do interesting stuff with this. But I think the jump for me was having a 4-track recorder, the reel-to-reel, and then an electric organ. Because I went from the piano, and then it was like, oh, I can push a button and it sounds like a reed or, some kind of organ or whatever. So that was interesting. But then the biggest jump was probably the Casio CZ 5000, because it had an 8-track sequencer, which I still lack in many sense today, actually. But that's another talk. So that I saw that first on the back of Jean-Michel Jarre's Rendezvous album. I saw the name, and then I saw it in the music shop, tried it out, and I was like, oh, this is the new sound of the new generation or whatever. I don't know how old I was. It was in the 80s. So it was probably pretty old. No. But the CZ 5000 from Casio, that's the one for me.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, so so this is just getting a little bit of interesting sort of background to some of the ways you're starting. But let's move into the present now then. And so clearly, all 4 of you are very interested in embracing technology with music. So we'll come back to you then, Imogen. What are you currently, what's currently exciting you? What's opening up new areas of creativity?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's interesting because I love the repeater. Yeah, it's a really brilliant machine. I suppose for me, it's always been about how can I get all this stuff and be in the flow of music making quicker. How do I get this stuff that's like wants to get out quicker? And so when I had the Atari computer at school, that was a big part of it for me, because everything before that was just like writing sticks and dots on a page and like hoping that one day maybe a small orchestra might play my pieces of music, which of course would never happen. So to be able to kind of be more than myself and layer that up with the Atari, and then discovering loopers, thanks to my friend in Switzerland, where I kind of would build up my vocal harmonies as well. So it's always about like how to create more flow, be more than myself at one point. And so developed these gloves with a team of people actually stemming from Bristol, University of West England. We got a first grant to explore some 5DT, like fibre optic gloves, and build our first neural network to capture posture recognition and be able to, do looping on the fly, because I loved the repeater, but it had to like press a button. And I wanted to be able to do it instantaneously on the fly in the movement. So now actually today almost marks a point in my life where I'm feeling a transitional move into the studio where I spent, since I was 12, like sat in front of a computer making music. And I've just had it up to here. With sitting in front of the computer. I spent hundreds of hours, even just on this one song that I'm now finally going to release, and it's 15 minutes long. And it's kind of it's a goodbye, actually, to working in this way with a computer. Much as it's emancipated me in terms of like being able to produce stuff myself and be able to mix and engineer, I'm fed up with sitting down. And I developed the gloves so that I could be up and about. So actually the next move for me is how do I bring that kind of full, rich production sound with all my layers of voice and be able to be spontaneous in the moment and conjure rich, produced sounds. Endless, actually, I don't know if anyone has come across Endless, is a huge part of this. Tim Exile is an absolute genius. And I love what he's done. I have this amazing creature called the Beat Machine in my living room now, which is an arcade game version of Endless.
You've got one.
It's so amazing. And so I'm trying to like mix now together after this song is done, which is I have to leave tonight to finish it to get it mastered on Monday, which is such a shame. But it's to like get the gloves. It's already speaking to Endless, already speaking to the kit in Ableton, but I'm buying lots of modular kit. And actually I absolutely love the Lyra, and I just found it when I was passing Elevator Sound one random day, didn't know what it was, walked in and was drawn to this Lyra because, I don't know why, it was like a calling. I've been having a recent kind of, a bit of an epiphany around noise and around my physical reactions to noise is way more intense than any music has ever given me. And I've kind of discovered that actually in the unknown, in the kind of random nature of noise and generative, kind of modular stuff, I'm discovering something really amazing because I've always been very structured and analytical about music and, harmony and, all very kind of detailed, right down to like 20 kick drums in a stupid song, which it's a lovely song. But it's just like, it's become so visual and like kind of cutting and splicing and making it look right that I've kind of lost this big picture stuff. So now in the background, Endless, the gloves, Ableton, modular stuff that I've, thanks to Hamish, has like guided me into this Eurorack space, and the Lyra, and Soma in general, actually. I really love the pipe when I saw this performance of JC Macabre, is that his name? Yeah, in this noise event. So I'm at a point where I want to be making music in the heat of the moment with all of this big sound, with gesture, with movement, but being able to capture it in the moment so that I could quickly go in and edit it and turn it into something. But really just massage that kind of improvising, spontaneous thing. Because I have a child, and life is like, it's hard to sit down and get into the flow. Right. So I just want to break down that point so that I can get into the flow immediately. So I'm also kind of developing technologies around with AI about how to train, things that I've already done on my stems and my voice, so that I can also use that live as a kind of collaborator. She's called Imogen, AI Imogen. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
So I think just if we can just talk about the gloves just for a moment, because obviously if you haven't seen any of the performances with Imogen with the gloves, you have quite a lot of expressivity that you can do with the gloves and control. could you just tell us just a little bit, if for people maybe who haven't seen them? There's some great videos on YouTube of Imogen, but highly recommend them. But just a little bit about sort of what facility the gloves give you.
Yeah. So previous to the gloves, I had like more and more stuff on stage to give me more and more freedom, but actually ended up spending so long preparing the stage with all of these little kind of devices, like a touchpad over here, so when I stood there it put something into record, or I'd have a sensor thing over here so when I passed it, or what's it called, the positional stuff, so that I could be in the moment, sample stuff on the fly, but also make my music in front of a live audience. But it was becoming like a lot of stuff. It was iCubeX, that was the name of the stuff. And it was very picky, and I just was like, I want to just do it in the moment. Like I had these microphones on my wrists when I saw somebody play the glass harmonica. They got the sound out of the wrists mics. And I was like, that's genius, I'm going to do that. So I put these on my wrists, and then I could go around and record the drummer or the violinist or my voice in stereo, or the guitar or the imbira. But I couldn't do record. I had to have these points. But then the idea came, I saw somebody who had a glove, and she had developed this way. It was for a robot opera for Todd Mack of MIT Media Lab. And she had this thing called the Vamp glove. And it was a connector that was like, basically created a loop, a connection. When she was singing, she'd be like, ah, and then it would take a snapshot of that little nano moment when she did that, identify the frequency, and then generate a sine wave on her computer, which she would then oscillate with a gyroscope. So it'd be like, and I was like, oh my God, that is the answer. Thankfully, oh my God, please can we make this? I had this whole system like erupted in my brain. And I was like, can we make this thing for musicians so that we can literally have the music in our hands and like have all access to these production tools, but just without having to touch them, just have them immediately. So now I can through my secret finger, I can access an enormously long reverb that I have in Reactor, and then I can reverse it by making a fist, and then I can loop it over here, and then I can create another loop by pressing the button, and then I can do the same thing on another channel, and then I can put them up and down, or I can bring in my harmonizer, and all of these things are already in Ableton, but they're literally at my fingertips in the moment. And so I have a kind of language that I like to use, of gesture and movement, but everyone uses them differently. And we ended up, it was never the point to sell them in the beginning, but obviously when musicians saw it, they're like, I want to do that. So we're like, okay, we'll have to figure out how to do that for other people, because it was this insane mess of a Max patch that Adam Stark largely built. And yeah, it was really difficult to remember what you were doing. So we created Glover. And then we started to sell them. But interesting, there is a gestural language that comes that we see across people, and it's obvious. It's like capture, release, pan left and right, up and down, twist for filter. It just makes sense. So actually, I did a kind of failed TED talk once about it, which I never ended up online, because I was doing all this stuff that I was like, wow, this is amazing. You could never do this. But to the audience, they were like, well, that's obvious. Like, they didn't see why what we'd achieved was so great. And they also didn't record it in stereo, which was the whole point, so that you could have left and right. So it didn't go up online. But the point was, it actually just looks totally natural. And it just feels like a second skin. It feels like an extension of yourself. And actually, when I'm performing with them, and we've still got a long way to go, because it's also about the machines that you're working with. They're also expecting 0 and 1 or 0 to, they're not expecting it in 3D. So you kind of have to do the hack of how to make it feel like sculptural. So there's still ways to go there. But that's becoming more and more as you get the Leap and the Mayo. Well, actually, that's not discontinued now, but what's it called? The Genki Ring. And the Leap. So those are all kind of coming into place. So I think we're going to start to see gestural language becoming more, and we just really love to be a part of that. But when I'm on stage and I'm performing this song called Hide and Seek, I play it entirely differently. I started to play it with the keytar originally. That's how it was made, with a harmonizer, the Digitech workstation. But then now I do it like a drone, and I bring in and out these, the loops, and I'm pitching them up and down, and I'm panning them left and right, and I'm using the gloves to send sound around the room immersively, and also to change the lights. And it just all feels easy. But you're doing so much, but you're using your human movement as your capacity, which is immense, and we're kind of limited to this like on, off, so the real plan is like, how do I create this physical human movement and connect it, to modular? How would I do that? How would I get these amazing sounds and still go there occasionally and, actually use the kit? But how do I become the music and sculpt it live and feel there's no separation or time gap? Sorry, that was a long one. Don't know if I answered the question.
That's a brilliant answer. Thank you. So, Kai, then, can you talk us through your kind of like your typical creative process, if you have a typical creative process, or how would you go about maybe starting an idea and getting something moving? What would be your paths for that?
There definitely is. I don't think there's a typical process that I could, write down and follow. And generally, I tend to work in for the most part, in blocks of time that I can identify with an album or some project. And I'm quite comfortable with not working for 6 months as well. I can quite happily do that, and it's not be a problem too much. And then start to go a little bit unwell in the head, and then feel like I have to do some work again, But in general, there's an idea of just some combination of either equipment or kind of sensibilities, or influences that I haven't explored or something like that. And so it can be a really, really small thing that is just, So for example, I made a record that came out last year, I think, maybe. It might have been the year before or last year, and then went straight into making, and it was a solo record, and normally I work in a more collaborative way. And then the next record, which went back to being a more kind of band-led record in a way, with something like a band, but not really. And having been in the studio working in a very solo way during kind of periods of not traveling and stuff like that, I got really deep into, a completely very old technology and approach, but just, again, getting away from the idea of looking at a computer, which does kind of burn me out pretty quickly now. Right. And that was just through kind of writing with on a desk, on a mixing desk, as opposed to from a beginning to end in a linear fashion on a screen. And so that record was made that way. But once I'd finished it, I kind of was so excited to kind of get away from that and go and work with my bandmate who was currently at that time living in America. So I went over there, and the idea was, having been in the studio with lots of modular and very kind of techie approach to the whole record, I just rented a Linn drum and a guitar and a AMS DMX, which is awesome pitch shifting delay, and a DX7 or a CZ1000. I can't remember, one of those kind of digi 80s things, and just went to write some songs that were completely, the opposite of what I'd just done.
All right.
And that generally is how I can get myself excited about, approaching, trying to find something that takes me somewhere else, and it's just a combination of different things. But for me, it was the kind of digital aspect of those old synths, and the slightly kind of Luddite crapness of them, and but also, they sound amazing in a certain context, but they're so limited that you really have to. For me, it was a way of kind of exploring songwriting in a different way, forcing myself to explore songwriting in a different way with that and the guitar. So that was...
Well, you mentioned then about using the mixing desk to write then. Mm-hmm. Is that so you get lots and lots of elements going on, and then you're bringing them... Can you just talk us through that a little bit, please?
Yeah. I think everybody I had like, people that come into the studio that haven't used one in that way, in a way that's like performative. It always kind of, like, everybody takes to it so quickly, because it's so intuitive and obvious. And just the simple fact of having all of your effects coming back onto separate channels with EQ, which you can then feed back into themselves, is such a kind of, the fact that it's there makes you use it, and obviously makes you work with your ears in a different way, and kind of focuses the mind in a certain way, and kind of really like get that sense that you've lost a lot of time, as opposed to just the struggles with the computer in general. So it's just a thing of making music with your ears. I think that really appeals to people in general, your ears and your hands. And there's no thing of like, well, you shouldn't boost that frequency or anything like that. You're just kind of moving the dial around until you feel it. And obviously, also limits you in interesting ways as well when you only have 2 or 3 sends or something like that. And it's just a really enjoyable way to approach it.
Like, this is a very physical way of interacting with the music.
Yeah, and you end up kind of intuitively creating environments, like certain sonic environments that you've built a space, on the desk, and you kind of, you find yourself there. Yeah.
Lovely. And then you would then like use the computer more as a tape recorder in that kind of
situation? On the record that I made, there was an option to kind of really heavily multi-track it and be able to edit it, and I just decided to work with 2-track and just edit kind of bits and pieces out of it. And there'll be days where I'd kind of really heavily, pitch something massively down and see what would happen, and that's the great thing about the computer, is just how quickly you can experiment with stuff like that. But a lot of it was just different performances cut together. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. So Hazel, so we're talking about like kind of a modern, the way we work in the present. How would you describe could you walk us through maybe how you sort of create something, and with what equipment?
I mean, similarly to these guys, there's no one way. It can be, often the stem of an idea can come before I even am in the environment where I can capture it in some way. Like, I might be out and about, so it might come from something that I then have to figure out how to realize. But often it can also be a byproduct of just sitting down with an instrument and kind of seeing what comes out and expressing. And going back to your earlier question about what particular gear is kind of taking us into new places, I've kind of been exploring the concept of sort of more 3-dimensional expression with controllers, like keyboard controllers like MPE and polyphonic aftertouch and all that kind of thing. And in a similar way to how Imogen was describing it, as for me, musical expression or performance is a physical, sensual thing. It's like a physical response. So I've been specifically, very recently actually, I've been playing with the Expressive E Osmos, which I've just fallen in love with quite quickly. So my angle is I'm coming at it from more of a traditional pianist angle, I suppose. And so I feel most at home when I'm sitting at a piano and playing, or some kind of keyboard instrument. And so when there are these additional aspects of being able to express in different ways, then that's just an extension of that for me. So that's how, that's sort of what I've been exploring, and just really enjoying the concept of, vibrato by wiggling the key, and these keys for the they feel very kind of organic almost. They feel wooden, and they feel a bit closer to a piano key than a lot of other keyboards. So there's just something really tactile about it that I'm really enjoying.
So obviously, if you were to record the Osmos, you could record all the control data will you record the control data, or will you just record it as almost like an acoustic instrument and just record the audio?
That's an interesting question, because I assume you can record all the data, and if you really want to manipulate it or even draw it in afterwards. But I feel like that maybe sort of defies the point of capturing a kind of a physical response and a moment where this is a human response to something. And I feel like actually, warts and all, that is what it is. That was a moment in time, and particularly with the Osmos, it's really sensitive with the pit. I'm sure you can hack into it and tame it more, but I'm really enjoying how kind of unstable and wonky as everything is feeling at the moment with it. You kind of press down a chord, dig into the aftertouch, and the pitch starts going, whoa, okay, what's happening here? And it doesn't sound like a machine. It's got personality, it's got expression. And I'm really into that.
So, I mean, many of us will be familiar with you with the videos you've been making about the UDO Super 6. I know that's an instrument that you really enjoy. What attracts you to the Super 6? What do you like about that specifically?
It was funny you should say that, because I was actually using the Osmos with the Super 6 yesterday, in fact. I really like, it's a bit of a rabbit hole of an instrument. You can get really quite lost in all the possibilities. And it's actually one of those instruments where it's almost the opposite end of the spectrum to what I'm talking about, where it's a human kind of leading. You can almost... you can almost just facilitate with this instrument and let it do its own thing, and let all the different modulations have their own personality, which is really cool.
Lovely. So, and I guess those are two very different instruments, the Osmos and the Super 6, in that the Super 6 has all of the parameters open for adjusting the sounds, whereas the Osmos is less about that and more about the actual expressivity. But and I know that you've been using the new Super Gemini 2, which is from UDO, a Bristol company, and I'm sure most of you will be familiar with them. But what are you finding with the Super Gemini then? What is that taking you anywhere new?
Yeah, similarly, I'm enjoying the imperfections that you can get with things like the ribbon controller and the polyphonic aftertouch. I will always work to try and get a machine to sound like it's broken or something. So do you know what I mean? So I like those little kind of maybe not imperfections, but it doesn't sound pristine when you start digging into those expressions. So yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you, Hazel. So Kim Bjorn of Bjorks. Now, in making those books, you have to play around with, explore an unbelievable amount of equipment. What do you look for that really, when you are exploring an instrument, what is it, the things that really kind of interest you and attract you, and you single out as being important?
First of all, I'm really enjoying this conversation. What you guys say is so interesting. So I hope to hear more. But I'd say that mostly I look for the kind of, the stress that an instrument puts on us, because we have, a violin, you learn it and then you play it. But in an electronic instrument, you have to learn the interface. You have to learn how it works. You have to maybe menu dive. So there's some cognitive stress, you could say, on you, and there's some physical, where are the knobs? Do I move my hand, whatever I do? Or wiggle my finger, all that stuff. So I think what I mostly look for is how immediate is it? How intuitive is it? And I must admit from, maybe it's by getting a little bit older, as we all do, I find that one knob per function is actually most attractive to me. I'm really tired of menu diving. So yeah, that's the intuitiveness, I think. I'm
Okay,
looking
yeah.
for.
So every time you have that abstraction layers and things that you have to remember, it's just gets in the way of that process. Okay, so I mean, with the various books that you've done, Patch and Tweak, the Patch and Tweaks, the Korg, and the history of Roland as well. What has been like quite revelationary to you? What have you discovered on your journey that sort of, are you noticing that maybe like Japanese design differs from European design in particular ways? Is there any sort of profound wisdom that you can share with us?
Not really in that sense. But I think what's interesting is that when you look through music history or electronic music history, the artists used what was there, what was new. And I know that some people maybe also here sold their, modular gear 5U in the 80s when the DX7 came out. And now they're really sad about it. And they want the modular gear back. So things ebb and flow, within technology. And I think we see also this concept of going back to one knob per function. And this more expressiveness we have, like we had since the theremin, really. But now with the osmosis and other instruments. And now I forgot your question.
Well, I guess one of the perspectives that you have, which is very unique, I guess, is just the sheer amount of hands-on that you've had with these different instruments. And I guess the philosophical design that goes into a lot of these things is going to be subject to fashions and change over time. And I was just kind of curious if you kind of also... maybe we could sort of, let's just take like the humble pitch bend and modulation wheel as an example. What do you think are like really beautiful? Let's just focus on just that, because I mean there's so many areas that you could focus on. Is there any particular instruments that sort of spring to mind that you just think have got that aspect just right?
Well, now we're focusing on left-hand controllers, I guess.
Yes.
So okay, that's also another talk. But yeah, the modern pitch wheel, basically I think it was Bill Hemsworth from working with Bob Moog back in the day, who kind of said, "Oh, why don't we try this stuff?" And they worked out some stuff. They had buttons also, and now today we have touch strips. We have the one from the Yamaha, and now we have it on the Hydra synth. We have it on other stuff, the Arturia Polybrute, for example. But I think also the French, the touché, the wiggling thing. But I think it comes back to, what Imogen said also, molding the sound maybe, or the composition, wiggling your finger, that immediateness, that touch with the sound. And I think there's been a shift from electronic music was electronic. It sounded electronic, it sounded new or different from what was there from the rock bands. And it was okay that it sounded artificial or futuristic or whatever. But we've kind of, and I think that's a very human thing, to make it human, to make it ours, to mold it as we kind of want it to be, creating our own instruments. We see more and more musicians creating their own instruments, as we have here also. And I think that's really interesting, and I hope we see more of that. So.
Lovely. So I think we'll just, the final questions then that I'd like to ask all of you. Which artists have been really inspirational to you in terms of that they seem to be able to harness expressivity and humanity within maybe electronic expression? Is that shall I?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, the person that springs to mind when I had the most kind of just really intense emotional experience from seeing somebody live was this Norwegian trumpet player called Arve Henriksen, and like John Hassel, the late John Hassel, he played through a harmonizer. but he was improvising, and he has the most beautiful tone, and he's just the most beautiful person as well. And I was dropping to the floor in tears at how gorgeous it was, what he was improvising. And I just wished that I could get to that point of being able to be that in improvisation, because I feel kind of limited to the piano and my voice, and I wanted to find this deeper, wider, more expressive way of interfacing with my electronic kit. So I guess it was a precursor journey to the gloves. But yeah, Arve Henriksen, Jamie Liddell. I always just loved watching him play. Oh God, what's his name? Squarefish's brother, Ceefax. I saw Ceefax play in this tiny little tent in Glastonbury, and it was just brilliant. He had this like modular stuff on like what looked like an ice cream tray, and he was playing Gabba, and then he like brought out a harmonica, and it was just the most brilliant thing ever. So I guess for me, it's just people just doing outsider stuff. Like, it's just like, whoa, that is off the charts crazy. I love it. I love how just completely off the charts, away from anything I've seen before. And so, yeah, and there's been those moments with a few people. And actually, I think is it J.C. Macabre? Is that how you pronounce it? He was playing the pipe in this underground place, the Judgment Hall. It's all a bit fetish. And he was playing this pipe, and it was really amazing to me. And I experienced this artist called Fleshlicker, who recently was just playing literally pink noise through this amazing like cabs that he's got commissioned to make. That's really super loud. And just going through a gate, and just the simplicity and awesomeness of this sound that he's perfected. And it's just literally going like that. And he's just like intensely looking at everyone in the audience, kind of a bit, oh man, it's so good. So that was good. Yeah, I was going to say someone else then, but it's just like the fringes, like the just complete, like unapologetic, I'm going to do it this way. That really, and Tim Exile, like seeing him for the first time, I just couldn't believe how somebody could get that sound live. And he'd obsessively built this this setup around, I can't remember the names of the
Flow Machine.
The Flow Machine, yeah, the Flow Machine. And I was like, how do you do that? Can you teach me? And he was kind of like, well. And I was like, do you want to come on tour? And he was like, okay. So we became friends, and I just like took him on tour with me. Yeah, it's these Zoe Keating as well. Really beautiful cello live. I mean, yeah, just I find it hard with where you know people who have to make songs and they're like recreating their songs. I don't really get that feeling from that. It's this kind of like complete like abandon and willingness to fail in something that's so extreme that I love from the shows and people that inspire me. Yeah.
Oh, lovely, thanks. So Kai, how about yourself? I mean, what, you know, who, or can you sort of tell us some artists that you've seen have maybe really inspired you or maybe made you think differently?
Yeah, so there's kind of, not obviously, but there's plenty of, there's a lot of music, more than half of music that I really, you know, really touches me and has a special place, and all of that is, you know, kind of completely unsequenced, recorded live music, you know. And then on the other hand, I disagree with the kind of dichotomy that kind of electronic music, which is kind of rigid and sequenced and thing, is somehow less human. You know, I think there's actually, and so what I enjoy sometimes in that aspect of it is when something is incredibly rigid and kind of cold in certain aspects that we would normally, you know, characterize it as, that the human is forced through in some way. There's an artist called Terence Dixon who I've taken lots of inspiration from, which is kind of really it's in the lineage of Detroit techno, I guess, but I think it's slightly more abstracted from the kind of classic sound. And it's kind of very loopy and minimal, and I can't quite explain why it does what it does, you know. And I kind of also don't really care how he made it, and I don't really want to know either, you know. And then I would say the same for Actress as well in the UK, who's always been a massive influence. And then, and then kind of lots of other stuff that isn't really as appropriate to like this chat, you know. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm gonna. Thank you, Hazel.
So I've got maybe a wild card and one a bit more traditional, and that maybe the most moving performance that heavily featured machines that I've ever seen was this French guy called Pierre Bastien. I don't know if anyone's heard of him, but he basically built all his instruments out of Meccano and motors and various things, and they were kind of self-sufficient kind of machines that would make noise on their own, but he would manipulate them along the way, and it was just seeing that really delicate kind of interaction between him and the machines, and just the subtlety of the sound changes that were made. You know, something might be plucked. In fact, I've just seen a little bit of a very similar performance by, I think, Graham Dunning, is that right? Who's just done one out there, quite similar vibe. Which was amazing, and so getting this kind of mechanical thing going on, more that side of machines. I don't know what it. I don't know if I could really put into words why I found it so moving, but it really was, and it did, as you say, it really made me question everything. So there was that, and also I was thinking of James Blake, who somehow really manages to include a lot of sequenced stuff with modular synths and things, but it's not all on backing track or anything like that. It's all triggered live, and I think there's some kind of clock being taken from a live pulse from the drummer or something like that. So it's all, you know, happening in real time. And it's done so seamlessly, and that combined with just his amazing touch on the piano and the keys was just really special.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, Kim.
Yes, I can keep it short because I can see we're on time. I'm searching my brain, but one name that comes to my mind is Taylor Dupree, who does this lovely loopy, glitchy stuff and kind of acoustic elements also, but also Luskill, I think that's how you pronounce the name. Tim Exile I also experienced. That was the reason I did Push Turn Move actually at some point, and I wanted to interview him for that, but I ended up with Imogen, but I think that's okay. Yeah. So, but also I'd say one thing that I remember Hans Zimmer said to me in an interview. He said, when you do modular, you actually, because he has a big modular system, believe me, and you have time to think. You know, he walks towards his modular. It takes a while. He has the cable in his hand, and he thinks about it. So at that time, he has time to think where to plug it in. And I think for me, musicians that take that time to think and feel, that's what, you know, engages me the most in a listening position. And it's anything from street musicians to, you know, thought out compositions by Vangelis or whoever, you know. If you can feel that, I think that's what changes things for us, when we can feel that someone has felt something and they've thought about it and they express that to us. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So everybody, so Imogen, Kai, Hazel, and Kim, thank you ever so much. Thank you everybody for coming.